Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
It's 10 to 6 here on LBC. We'll come back to your calls in a few minutes. But let's first of all talk to Sir John Curtice. He's Professor of Politics at Strathclyde University, known to many of us as the man who crunches the numbers on our TV screens during these election night specials. And like me, he's still awake even now. And John, very good evening to you.
Good evening, Iain.
Now, let's look at what's happened over the last 24 hours. In some ways, not a lot has happened, has it?
No, indeed. So far as the Conservative, Labour and Liberal Party, Democratic parties are concerned, they find themselves in a pretty similar position to what they were 4 years ago when the seats up for grabs were last contested. There's been very little in the way of change of control of councils, very little net turnover of seats. But the one exception, of course, is not what we've had. It was no great surprise. There's a collapse in the UKIP vote 4 years ago. UKIP did well in the local elections, winning the equivalent of around 16% of the vote. On the elections were, after all, taking place on the same day as European elections, where UKIP came first. Well, in last year's general election, the UKIP vote collapsed. This year, that collapse was confirmed. And the importance of that is that certainly that's one of the reasons why, at the end of the day, it looks as though the Conservative Party have been able to draw with the Labour Party in our projection of what all this might mean if the whole country were voting, because it's in those places where UKIP did very well 4 years ago. These also tend to be places where the Leave side did well in 2016. It's here, above all, where the Conservative voters advanced much strongly, and again thereby also confirming another important feature of last year's general election, which is that the Conservatives have found it easier to progress amongst Leave voters, and in Leave voting areas much more difficult amongst Remain voters, Remain voting areas, and that therefore little memo to the Prime Minister comes from these elections, which is, do remember that the Conservative Party does now consist predominantly of people who voted Leave, and that therefore if you're going to keep this coalition together, you will need to come up with a Brexit outcome to the negotiations that Leave voters are at least reasonably satisfied with.
Now, the Liberal Democrats are trumpeting great successes. They've gained, I think, 4 councils. They're up by 76 councillors, I think. I'm not sure people expected that necessarily. How much of that do you put down to Brexit? Because it wasn't just in South West London that they did quite well. They did gain some councils elsewhere and councillors elsewhere.
Yeah, the truth is there's no clear evidence, if you look at the pattern of the voting, of the Liberal Democrats systematically doing better in places which voted Remain as opposed to voted Leave. Actually, the Liberal Democrats still seem to be the one party whose ability to win votes doesn't seem too much affected by where people stand on Brexit, despite the fact the party has a much more distinctive position on the issue. The Liberal Democrats have done so well in terms of seats, and particularly in terms of highlighted council gains, is because they've had a very focused success, and it's actually a focused success that replicates again something that was evident in last year's general elections. Where the Liberal Democrats have done best is where they were sharing first and second place with the Conservatives in other recent local elections, i.e. there was still a substantial remnant of Liberal Democrat strength, and in those circumstances, Liberal Democrats have advanced relatively strongly, often at Labour's expense in terms of votes, and then as a result at the expense of the Conservatives in terms of seats. And indeed, in that respect, Richmond, Kingston and South Cambridgeshire are all of a piece. These are places with where they were primarily in competition with the Conservatives, and these are the places where previous Liberal Democrat strength has now been focused into a gain. But at the moment, at least, we're not looking at the Liberal Democrats advancing significantly broadly across the piece. For Liberal Democrat revival, the recovery from the coalition is still a long way away. The party still has got a lot of work to do before it looks as though it's anything like the party that it was before it entered the coalition in 2010.
Now, on Labour, how much solace can they take from these results? I see a lot of Labour supporters on Twitter are quoting you as saying, well, if you extrapolate this result to a general election, Labour become the biggest party. But can you really do that?
Well, I mean, all you can say is, look, what do the results today suggest, is the equivalent performance in a general election. This is not a forecast of what would happen in a general election. It's an attempt to give a measure of how well or badly the parties have done in these elections. And the truth is, because we are indeed saying Labour and Conservative neck and neck, that's better than the Labour Party achieved in the general election. It's also better than achieved in last year's county council elections. The trouble is, Iain, the way I would put it is this, is that in local government elections, the opposition party at Westminster is playing at home. It's usually difficult for the government to do as well as the opposition. The opposition is usually ahead in local government elections. Well, the trouble is, therefore, for the Labour Party, this looks as though it was a draw. And if you have a draw, and you have to sort out, well, who's won, well, it ends up being decided on away goals. And the truth is, the Conservatives, I think, have got more away goals in this contest. And it is perhaps particularly disappointing, given that in advance of the election, the manager of the Labour Party was saying that actually the party was going to put the ball into the Conservatives' net on 6 at least occasions. So I think because of the expectation the Labour Party generated, and because usually we expect opposition to be ahead in local government elections, at the end of the day, this has to be regarded as something of a disappointment for Labour.
Owen Jones is telling us all that this has been the greatest Labour performance in local elections since 1971.
Owen, I'm going to start with you because you did campaign hard in these. Are you happy tonight?
Well, I mean, Labour made... Let's just remember where we were a year ago. We were talking about the electoral extermination of the Labour Party after local elections when Labour got 27%. 4 weeks later, got 40%, deprived the Tories of a majority. This time round, according to the BBC's own projections, Labour would be ahead in seats in Parliament. So that shows last year wasn't a fluke. In London, Labour's got its best results since 1971. The Tories had their worst results.
And I think this is a correction to that assumption.
Have they
People
reached
wnot be
their
scared
peak?
of momentum.
No, not at all. I mean, if you talk to non-momentum activists in places like Trafford and Portsmouth, they attribute many of their successes to momentum's activism. The problem generally in politics at the moment is polarisation. So Jeremy Corbyn's Labour got the same percentages Tony Blair did in 2001.
Now, I don't understand how he can claim that when Labour have a net loss of councils of 1.
I think he is perhaps focusing as a member of the metropolitan chattering classes on the outcome in London, and it's true that the Labour Party's share of the vote in London looks as though it's going to be the highest in 71. There was a small swing to Labour in London, and indeed in some places such as Haringey, where there were claims that the work of momentum was undermining Labour's position, actually the Labour Party seems to have got an even bigger swing than some other parts of London. The trouble is, however, that outside of London, there has been a small swing to the Conservatives since 2014, and that in particular in some Leave voting parts of the Midlands, of which the losses in Derby and Nuneaton are emblematic, the Labour Party has clearly lost ground. And so, therefore, you can argue that in terms of the projected share of the vote, this is the best Labour performance since 2012. But I think, in truth, you certainly cannot claim in some way or another this is some dramatically effective Labour performance. I mean, as compared with, if I dare mention it in the same breath as Owen Jones, that Tony Blair did much better than this in the mid 1990s. Then you'll get some idea that there is still a long way for the Labour Party to go before they're putting in the kind of local government performance that we usually see if a party is at least looking as though it's got some chance of winning the next general election.
Well, I'm going to leave you with a text from Iain in Bury, who says, Iain, when you speak to John Curtice, will you tell the poor man to go and get his head down? He must be knackered. I guess that's what you're about to do, John.
Yes, indeed. I think I've got one more thing to do and then quietly going to go to bed.
There's always one more thing, isn't there? Well, we appreciate...
there always is. Such is life.
We appreciate all your hard work. Thank you very much. That's Sir John Curtice, Professor of Politics at Strathclyde University.